So here is a dream of mine that I thought would be great to help average citizens understand kind of what's going on in terms of this retreat that they held in February, the city council did. And it was something I'd never been a part of, never seen them do. So it was really quite a learning experience for me. And I thought it would be easy to break it down and just show you kind of the things that came out of this retreat so that you could understand how to frame your approaches to the city council, knowing their priorities and their guiding principles are really good ways to influence and encourage them to do the things that you're asking in ways that if you just were approaching them without any indication you understood this, it kind of would render your attempts less profitable. So one of the things I wanted to start off with was the facilitator of the retreat gave us like a circle of how this process should work, because it's just easy. It's always continuous. It's always going forward. There's no really stopping a starting point because it's always something that we work through. And I think this is really important to understand moving forward as average citizens. So the first step he mentioned was that community gave their input, and then the staff gave their input. And then the city council took all that and envisioned what they wanted for their priorities. And then based on those priorities, the city staff would make plans, because you see the city council gives the policy and the guiding principles where the staff executes it. And the city council can help them redirect if they get off course or doing things that weren't quite what they intended. So the city council instructs while the staff actually does the work. So the staff plans based on what the council has given their vision for. Then the city council comes back and affirms what the staff is doing. Hey, you're doing a good job. This is exactly what we wanted. And then the staff executes and bases a lot of their budgetary items and things like this. It helps them know exactly how to spend time and energy on things the city needs. And then the city council evaluates, and then the staff adjusts. And I think what's so important to understand in this process is that the city and the city council never once reached out to the citizens to understand what they wanted. We were never a part of this process. And I think it's very troubling in the times that we're in and the situations we have to not have any say in what's going on, make sense as to why things are working the way they are or not really working the way they should be. Okay, we're going to go through these as briefly as I can, because I'm only going to tell you what I think really matters to most average citizens, not just all the nuances, because there's so much more information I can go in. Obviously, they talked for 7 hours. There's so much more I could express, but I'm going to keep it short and sweet. So the purpose of this whole retreat was to develop strategic vision for the next 3 to 5 years for the city. And I had never been a part of a process like this. It was very fascinating to get to hear them share thoughts that a lot of them hadn't shared publicly. And I was surprised by what I found out. So let's dig into these different council priorities that they've established for the next 3 to 5 years. Okay, so the way they came up with these priorities were they got in groups on the council and they came up with ideas, and then they brought those together and stuck them on a list. And the ones that had the most repetition from the different groups got promoted to the top of the list, and then they tried to work in other ones that fit in like a subcategory of the priority. And then they were like, is there anything? And the facilitator was like, is there anything else? And one of the councils said, community engagement. And it was like crickets. Nobody said anything. And the facilitator was like, it's really important you have community engagement because you're going through so many changes. You need to make sure the community understands what's going on. And so I think it's funny that this is their number one, community engagement. And they want to be the preeminent source of municipal information. This is one of the areas I've tried so hard to get them to work with us on, to give us more information, to help us understand what's going on, and to make us not feel like we're part of a conversation that's been going on without us for years. But it seems it's fallen on deaf ears. I'm thankful that they came up with a totally easy agenda after me saying, come on, explain it to us so we can be a part of this, rather than acting like we have to figure out all the language of the agenda and all that stuff. They want to maintain quality, effective internal communication. That's not in our hands. They want to be proactive in public education initiatives. I just feel like they think we're kind of like children and they treat us like children. And so I hope that they can come up with some more strategic ways to get the public involved by informing them of things that actually matter to them. And then the last thing, they want to foster purposeful collaboration with voices across the community. And that just means they want to talk to the right people. Sadly, average citizens are probably not going to be included in that. And, when they do surveys, how many of us know that they've done a survey for the health department? We don't know these things. And that's the problem with their approach, is they don't have any buy-in to getting us to be engaged. They just have to go through the motions and then say they did the work and we're the lazy ones. And I just don't think that's a good approach. And I hope that this really does indicate a turning point in how we behave as people who are supposed to be in charge of the government, and how we require our elected officials to do more than just placate us and pretend like we really are irrelevant in the conversation. All right, I'm going to try and go through this one quickly because I think this is one of those priorities that makes absolutely no sense, because there's no way really to measure your success in this one. I guess in all of these, to be honest, there's no way to measure, are we doing a good job? And that's the problem with casting vision that has no way to see if you're being successful. For number 2 is sustainable growth. And I will say that there's been a lot of lack of communication on the city's part and the city council's part on what their plans and visions are for what's been going on. So some of this really comes, it feels just a little off, if I can say this. And having sat through the conversation, again, I think this is just so vague that we really don't have a way to really navigate through this. And it feels very specific, yet way broad. Okay, so objective 1 is to encourage and incentivize training and development of tradespeople for high demand jobs within the city's organization. It was suggested that we use the schools, the universities, the trade schools to encourage people to come work for the city and, give them incentive. And I just feel like incentivizing people to come work for you in entry level positions doesn't maintain their desire to stay. And I'm fearful, like so many other employees that have come, they just move on to greener pastures, and it doesn't seem like a very wise strategy, in my opinion. Objective 2 is to plan for infrastructure repairs after the major construction. And I am not aware that they knew this construction problem was going to be a case. So are they waiting to repair all of our streets till they get everything, the construction underway, or is this just kind of a happy accident? That's the problem, is we don't know their plans and visions because they don't disclose them to us very often, if at all. Objective 3 is to invest in quality of life amenities. Again, I think if we had healthy streets and buildings, and we were taking care of the facilities that we have are owned by the city, it would go a long way to help maintain that quality of life and promote better growth in that area. But when you budget, I guess it was a couple weeks ago, the Parks and Rec board was encouraged to tell the director of that board that department what projects they wanted for 2027, just mentioning how bad the parks were and how they needed this update and this update. And I was just baffled, because it's like I've sat here and watched them spend $1 million on a dog park, almost $500,000 on a bathroom alone. And then they go for another 2 or 3 bathrooms at almost that cost. And it's like, what are you doing? You're not even taking care of the structures we have, and yet you're spending it on else. And there's no plan in place, even though there's a master plan. And it feels very chaotic and very disorganized. And it's like, no matter what we say, it doesn't seem like it's changing. So we'll see if this helps get them back on track. Objective 4, diversify funding sources to offset volatility or reduction in property and sales tax. And so they're concerned about SB2, which is that, they have limitations on what they can gather. That was mentioned so many times. I don't know if we can recapture the revenue that SB2 limits us. And it's like, we're not even doing a good job with the money we have. Why would we want to give you any more? It seems so disconnected from what is going on in our city. And it's really challenging, because to say that we don't have enough to pay both the firemen and the city staff and give them competitive pay is very concerning to me as a citizen who's been paying attention. And to say that we have to pick and choose or raise taxes, I just want to say, where's all the money going? What have we been spending it on? So that is something I probably went on way too long about, but that is the sustainable growth. So we're not able to sustain it right now under the plans that we have. And so we've got to do something quickly and strategically, or it's going to just all fall apart. And all this extra money that's coming in is just going to be wasted on pet projects and things that don't really promote us to move forward and give our children and our grandchildren a city that they can be proud of. Okay, so one thing I've noticed is, having been present for the conversation, they've had more engagement behind closed doors or in emails with the guys. They've honed this in a little bit better. So one of the things that was made very clear early on in this conversation about number 3's priorities, housing, is that the city is not in the business of building houses. They are in the business of making it where it's easy to build houses, or it's easy to buy, easier to get houses built in certain areas of our city. And that's kind of all they can really do. And so housing objective 1 is to optimize zoning and land development regulations for streamlined, low regulatory environment. So they're going to try and pre-identify places that are good for building houses. Objective 2, identify and promote infrastructure ready areas for housing. I guess that's what I just said. Jumped ahead because one of the things that they do have the streamline is the permit process and getting it all taken care of. But identifying and promoting infrastructure ready areas, that's another area that the mayor has had a really high priority on, is infrastructure. And so the Rebuild ABI has been really pushing ahead $1 million a year to get infrastructure built. But you would think under this environment, you wouldn't have to incentivize builders to build. You would just let them build and it would work. And so we could be spending that $1 million in other areas. I don't think it's a bad program, but when you're having to prioritize, the firefighters contract over non-civil servants or the city staff competitive pay, it seems confusing that we don't know what we're really supposed to be doing as a city. So objective 3, create a developer engagement process to align communities with development opportunities. Again, this is just something the market has to take care of. And I don't know if the city really has that much input that they're going to change. Our housing issue is a housing issue. And it's been that way since, the data center came in, and then we're going to have a bunch of changeover and additional families come in with dais. And we just got to start taking care of things. But the problem is the things the city should have been taking care of, like infrastructure, has not been in place, so that it makes things a little bit more challenging in some ways to get this stuff going. Objective 4, evaluate opportunities to modify floodplain and floodway constraints. So a gentleman just recently wanted to build a house on this property. And because the floodplain has changed, getting those things taken care of to make it easier, where you don't have to deal with worrying about the floodwaters. And again, I have no idea what all that entails, but apparently our floodplains have changed over the years. And so to update that to make sure it's easy, there's some other opportunities for affordable housing if there's no floodplain involved. And I think that's very helpful for our city to focus on. Okay, priority number 4 is infrastructure. And this is a big deal for me because I've been asking the city to communicate, the city council to communicate better, the city communicate about what's going on. And it's been really frustrating to see the lack of communication. So let's talk about these quickly because I'm dragging this out way more than I expected it to. Objective 1 is to fund infrastructure development at a rate that exceeds asset deterioration. Okay, way important to do that. Should have been a priority from day one. I mean, again, I'm not trying to say that they haven't had this as a priority. It just wasn't as clear in the past from what I understood. Objective 2, to continue planning for the Cedar Ridge Reservoir. This has been I hope it's not like the bridge to nowhere. We try and get all this money to go to this thing and we never get it done. It's just kind of like a pipe dream. But I do think they have some processes going to get that moving further along. And objective 3, prioritize proactive preventative maintenance. So you have to have a capital improvement project plan in place, which I found out they hadn't been using for the last 5 years. And I've been asking, why do we always go to bonds for projects? And they're like, that's just the way we do it. It's because I haven't had a plan. And I don't understand how this city has gotten away without a plan for as long as it has, knowing the history of our city and knowing how important it is that we are prepared for the future. And it seems so confusing to me as a citizen who's been asking these hard questions, and they've dismissed me and belittled me for asking these questions. And it turns out that they weren't doing the right thing. All right, let me go to the next one so we can see what those last 4 are. Reestablishing the capital improvement program established by master plans. So they have some master plans, but will they have a master plan for Fort Phantom? I don't know about their master plan for the roads. I don't know master plan for debilitated or falling apart structures. Everything seems to be at end of life, and so they have to replace it as an emergency. But it's because we've not been planning for this. And it's so frustrating as a citizen to finally hear what you've known has been going on, is to be going on and go, where have y'all been? What have y'all been doing? And then lastly, 5 is ensure infrastructure capacity maintenance do not impede economic development. One of the street maintenance and advisory board and maintenance, whatever that one was, they were like, is it because we don't have enough contract workers to do the jobs we need to do? And the guy was like, no, actually, if we just had money, we could get these projects going. And so with our streets downgrading to the lowest level possible, we're not adding enough money. All this revenue is coming in from the properties that are producing revenue. And it's like, where's all this money going? And that's my question. Where's the money? Show me the money. I think I did pretty good. There you go for infrastructure. Priority number 4. Okay, let's land this plane. We're on number 5, organizational excellence. Objective 1 is implement well-coordinated hiring plan across departments that's responsive to growth. And I will say this, we have to have a positive work environment, where staff feel like they are set up for success and that they're excited to come to work. And so compensating them financially is good, but also having a really healthy work environment. And I still feel like we're recovering from some of the old practices that went out when our last city manager retired. So I'm looking forward to seeing how our new city manager and deputy can really cultivate a really healthy environment for all city staff across the board. Objective 2, adopt and maintain a proactive technology approach to maximize operational efficiency. I think that's good, but you have to have a plan in place. You can't just do that on a whim. You've got to be intentional about that. And so I hope after the cyber attack that they've become more intentional on how they manage and take care of those different aspects. Objective 3, establish a capital improvement program for technology. Of course, that's so needed in order to be prepared for the way the market, the environment is changing, especially in terms of technology. Objective 4, maintain competitive workforce that meets national standards for every area, just as we do with public safety. By the way, I don't notice public safety really being a priority in any of these. And that's troubling to me because they talk about infrastructure all the time. And so to say that it's not a priority because you don't talk about it, it's an assumed priority. Well, public safety should be the top priority. Infrastructure should be pretty close there to second, because you cannot maintain a city if you don't have a healthy police force, firefighters. That really helps the price of homes and so many other things. And so we've really got to make sure that that's established. And so sadly, for the next 3 to 5 years, public safety is going to be hopefully not an afterthought, but it seems like it is again, unfortunately. And they discussed this in the meeting. And so I thought public safety had really gone to the top, but it looks like they nixed that and went back to their vague, visionary, bland, not like you can't really, it's not bland. It's just, there's no way to really judge, are you being successful? Where's the, priorities? You just don't have any measurable goals. Maybe that comes to the city staff. I don't know. They don't tell us. So I'm kind of clueless when it comes to that. Objective 5, provide and maintain market rate compensation for city employees so that is an issue. Again, a positive workforce makes it easier to help foster that. And so getting them to the place where they have market rate compensation is definitely a plus. Abilene needs that for stability, and I'm looking forward to see how that positively changes. And here we go. We did it. Now we're to the guiding principles. I really hope to keep this under 15 minutes, but there's just so much information, and hopefully I haven't repeated myself too much. I'm just an average citizen trying to understand how things work. And, this leads to me wanting to actually really make a difference by being on council, because I actually have a little bit more power and a little bit more influence than I can just as an average citizen. And so I've done the work. I know I'm qualified and I'm ready to serve. And I just need to get this out so people can understand that there's more that we can learn and grow and be more influential in how our elected officials govern our city. That's part of the plan, and it can't work without us participating. So let's look at these guiding principles. Again, this is supposed to motivate them. So there are times where they don't line up. We can bring it back and say, hey, listen, this is your guiding principle. Care for one another. Okay, clear vision, common sense economic development, diversified unification on city council. That just means they get along, but they don't agree on everything, but we need more discussion. So that doesn't talk about that. Exceptional customer service, which I think is a great thing. Fiscal responsibility, which I have questions on about their fiscal responsibility right now in just so many areas, and trying to find that out is kind of complicated if you don't have a willing elected official to participate with you. High quality of life, impeccable integrity, operational excellence, and employer of choice, responsive, reliable, and adaptive. And to me, it seems like these guiding principles are all focused about how the city staff wants to operate. And I get that, but at the same time, where is the citizen? This is where it shows very little, if any, citizen involvement in this process. And I think it just falls a little flat. As someone who really has great hopes for our city, and I'm willing to invest and see that we can make it a great place to live for our children and our grandchildren, this falls flat. And that's why I put it at the end, because I really don't see this being very effective or being able to be utilized too much, to be honest. It's so vague. And it's very wordy, and it sounds good, but it really doesn't have substance, in my opinion. So, I think we really need to get back to some basics and reestablish what the priorities of the city are. We're subsidizing things in our city that we don't have to, and we're asking our firefighters to take on the burden of not having a plan for competitive pay for the non-civil side. Like, there's so many things in our roads, they're not getting better. They're getting worse at a larger rate. And it's truly frustrating to have sat and watched this happen in real time. So I'm hoping these priorities get us on track. And I know we've got a lot of opportunities ahead. And I look forward to seeing what Abilene can do and how we can utilize the resources God has given us to, be the key city that we've been called so many times for so many years. So hope that helps. I hope you understand things a little differently. Thank you for sticking with me. This was a long episode because there's a lot to talk about. And I think that's the problem, is to get started. You can't really you can piecemeal it to some degree, but at some point you're just going to have to hold your nose, dive in deep, and see what you can take away. And I hope that this is giving you a start to that very idea so that we can move forward and do great things here in Abilene. Until next time.